All right, so picture this.
Yeah.
You're sitting across the table from, well, Joseph Stalin,
Oh, yeah.
one of the most ruthless dictators probably in history.
Right.
And you're not just anyone. You are the president of the United States,
Oh, wow.
tasked with nothing less than, securing the future of the free world.
Yeah.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
That's what FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, faced head-on during World War II. He had to forge this alliance. It was unlikely,
Very much so.
but oh, so crucial.
Absolutely.
So today, we're diving deep right into that very relationship between FDR and Stalin. And to help us navigate these choppy waters, we've got the insights of historian Phillips O'Brien from the American History Hit podcast.
A great resource.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about it, on the surface, you've got these two figures. I mean, polar opposites.
Oh, really?
Roosevelt, the charismatic, leader of democracy.
Right.
And then Stalin, the Iron Fist, the ruler of this totalitarian state.
Yeah.
But bound together
Yeah.
by this shared goal, taking down Hitler.
A common enemy. It makes strange bedfellows, as they say.
And that shared goal, though, forced them to walk this tightrope.
Right.
You've got clashing ideologies, personal ambitions, and just a whole heap of mistrust.
Oh, tons.
Yeah. And one of the things that really struck me from O'Brien's analysis was, Roosevelt's almost, naive belief in the power of just personal diplomacy.
Yeah.
Like he genuinely thought, I can charm this guy,
Yeah.
build rapport. We can get past these political differences.
It's fascinating, isn't it, that he had that kind of faith in the power of personality.
I know.
Yeah.
And you see that in how he even wrote to Stalin. It was like familiar.
Yeah.
Using phrases like,
Yeah.
just to create this sense of, hey, we're buddies.
Yeah. Trying to build that camaraderie, that sense of trust.
But did Stalin buy it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah. I mean, was it a charm offensive that worked, or was Stalin just seeing right through it?
I think that's something historians are still debating.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a historical chess match.
It is.
Each leader's trying to outmaneuver the other.
Yeah.
And we see this play out so clearly during the Tehran conference back in '43.
Right.
Even the location, Tehran, just hop, skip, and a jump over the Soviet border.
As close as Stalin would get.
As close as he would go. I mean, the guy was paranoid, reluctant to leave, his fear of control.
Absolutely. He was all about control.
But Roosevelt makes the trip. Desperate.
Yeah.
He needed Stalin on board for D-Day.
He needed that cooperation.
Big time. But it gets even more interesting. Do you remember that whole supposed assassination threat against Roosevelt?
Oh, right.
Leads him to stay in the Soviet compound.
Yeah.
Essentially, he becomes a guest.
Yeah.
Or some might say a prisoner of Stalin.
Right. Right. It's a detail that's both dramatic and really revealing.
It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, was it a legitimate security concern or a power move by Stalin? I mean, either way, you put Roosevelt in a vulnerable position.
Yeah.
It highlights that unequal power dynamic.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And yet, even with that cloud of suspicion hanging over them, the Tehran conference, they come out with a key agreement, and that is D-Day.
It is remarkable when you think about it.
Especially with Churchill dragging his feet initially.
Yes, exactly. The big three weren't always so aligned. Churchill was worried about casualties initially, opposed the D-Day plan, but Roosevelt and Stalin, they were united in their goal to defeat Hitler, and they got their way.
It shows how this unlikely alliance just reshuffled, the deck in terms of traditional allegiances. I mean, the U.S. and the Soviet Union ideologically at odds.
Oh, for sure.
But they find this common ground against Hitler, and they're disagreeing with their closest ally.
Great Britain.
Great Britain.
It's an interesting dynamic.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So Tehran marks this turning point, right? It seems like victory is within reach. But just a year later, things shift.
Yeah.
Politically, personally. Roosevelt's health takes a nosedive. And the focus goes from winning the war to, well, what does peace even look like?
A whole new set of challenges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we'll dive into that next chapter of this story right after.
Yeah, so by February 1945, the war in Europe, it was winding down.
Yeah.
The Allied victory, it seemed pretty much guaranteed.
Right.
But the big question mark was, well, what happens next? What's Europe going to look like after all this?
The post-war world.
Yeah, and that uncertainty, that really hung over the Yalta Conference. That's where Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, they meet up again.
Okay.
This time, it's a little more scenic. It was a Crimean resort town.
All right, so a little nicer than, war-torn Tehran.
A little bit.
But the stakes even higher.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, they're not just hashing out battle plans now.
Yeah.
They are basically redrawing the map of Europe
Yeah.
with all the political baggage and the ideological clashes that come with it.
It's a whole different ballgame. And
Mhm.
to make things even more complicated, Roosevelt's health, it was going downhill fast.
Oh, yeah.
He was a shadow of his former self. The man who went to Tehran just a year earlier, gone.
Wow.
Accounts from the time, they describe him looking gaunt, exhausted,
I see.
just drained. It's hard to picture him as that same, forceful presence he once was.
And I mean, how do you think Stalin saw this?
It's tough to say for sure, but Stalin, he was no dummy.
No.
He was incredibly perceptive when it came to reading people.
Right.
I'd bet he saw this change in Roosevelt and he thought, opportunity,
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I can push a little harder for what I want.
Oh, yeah. Leverage.
Exactly. Plus, remember, this time they were meeting on Stalin's turf.
Oh, right.
I'm sure that gave him an extra boost of confidence.
Of course.
As the talks went on, there was one issue, though, that became this, central sticking point. Poland.
Poland's okay.
Loaded issue, both emotionally and politically.
Right.
You see, for Stalin, Poland was this crucial buffer zone, essential for Soviet security.
Right.
He was determined to install a pro-Soviet government there no matter what.
I see.
But then you have Roosevelt. He's got the Polish-American community back home breathing down his neck. Millions of voters.
Yeah.
They wanted to see a free and democratic Poland rise from the ashes of the war.
Understandably.
He was walking a tightrope,
Yeah.
trying to keep Stalin happy while still, sticking to these democratic ideals.
That's a tough position to be in.
Oh, it was. And the problem was, the Red Army, they were already occupying Poland.
Oh, right.
Stalin held all the cards. Roosevelt, he's sick. He's desperate for some kind of compromise, He begs Stalin repeatedly to at least include some democratic elements in the post-war Polish government.
Did Stalin budge?
Stalin, who is a master manipulator, right? So he gives these vague assurances.
Okay.
He agrees to include democratic elements, but he doesn't define what that means.
Oh, wow. Classic.
Right. It was clear he had zero intention of letting any real democratic freedoms take root in Poland.
So he basically outsmarted Roosevelt.
He did. Roosevelt was just too ill, too worn down to put up much of a fight.
Man, what just a tragic irony, isn't it? This alliance,
Yeah.
born in the fires of war, this partnership between two such different leaders, paves the way for, well, decades of tension and conflict between the superpowers.
Yeah, it really highlights that even alliances, even those born out of pure necessity, they can have these unintended consequences. Consequences that echo throughout history.
Absolutely.
And the consequences, in this case, they were huge.
Just a few months after Yalta, Roosevelt dies.
Yeah.
Leaves this gaping hole in American leadership at probably the worst possible time.
It's true.
Truman gets thrown into the presidency, totally unprepared for the Cold War that was about to erupt.
And all of this, it traces back to that messy, complicated relationship between Roosevelt and Stalin. I mean, their wartime alliance, it did achieve its main goal. Hitler was defeated.
Right.
But the seeds of a new global conflict, the Cold War, they were already planted.
It's wild how history often comes down to a handful of relationships.
He really does.
The personalities, the choices these individuals make.
Yeah.
And with Roosevelt and Stalin, their alliance, born out of pure necessity, it shaped the whole 20th century.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're still feeling those ripples today.
Absolutely. What really gets me is just the weight of the decisions they faced.
Oh, no, right.
Imagine trying to hammer out the future of Europe while the world's still on fire. Millions of lives at stake. It's almost incomprehensible.
Yeah, and you got to remember, they were coming from completely different worlds, ideologically.
Right.
Roosevelt, with his faith in democracy and freedom,
Yeah.
and Stalin, the poster child for totalitarian control.
Right.
It's amazing they found any common ground at all.
And that's where Roosevelt's belief in that personal touch really comes into play.
Right.
He was convinced that if he could build a rapport with Stalin, he could actually influence him.
Yeah,
Maybe even soften him up a bit.
but we've seen how that played out.
Yeah.
Stalin, he was a master chess player, always thinking 10 steps ahead.
Oh, for sure.
The alliance with the U.S., it was just a means to an end for him.
Right.
Defeat Hitler, check. Expand Soviet control over Eastern Europe, check.
And he pretty much pulled it off.
Yeah.
By the end of the war, the Red Army, they were everywhere.
Right.
Stalin was calling the shots in most of Eastern Europe, regardless of what they agreed to at Yalta.
So, looking back at this whole unlikely alliance.
Hmm.
It really begs the question, did the U.S. make the right call? Was there another way, a path that could have led to a different world?
It's a question that keeps historians up at night.
I bet.
Some say the alliance with Stalin was the only option, a necessary evil to defeat Hitler.
Right?
Others think Roosevelt was naive,
Yeah.
that he completely underestimated Stalin's ruthlessness and his ambition.
Yeah. It's such a complex issue. No easy answers.
Definitely not.
But by digging into this history, by really getting to know these figures and their decisions, we gain a deeper understanding of what shaped our world.
That's the beauty of history, right?
Yeah.
It's not just dates and names in a textbook.
No.
It's a living story of ambition and conflict, and sometimes even cooperation. And it teaches us that even the most improbable alliances can leave a mark for generations to come.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the Roosevelt-Stalin alliance, it really leaves me thinking. The past might be prologue, but it's also a mirror.
Yeah.
When we look back, we can see our present reflected, maybe even get a glimpse of what's to come.
Absolutely. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning from the lessons of history.
It's the best compass we have.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next fascinating historical exploration.